The wire bit deep into the small bear cub's leg, and Jake Martinez could see the blood seeping through its brown fur as he crouched behind a thick oak tree. The little creature was barely 3 months old, struggling weakly against a cruel metal snare that some poacher had set illegally in these protected woods. Every movement the cub made only tightened the wire further, cutting deeper into its flesh. Jake had been walking his usual morning patrol route through Cedar Ridge National Forest when he heard the desperate whimpering. As a park ranger with 12 years of experience, he had seen plenty of animals caught in illegal traps, but this sight made his stomach turn. The cub was dying slowly, its small body growing weaker with each passing minute as it lost blood. From somewhere in the dense forest behind him came a sound that made Jake's blood run cold. A deep, guttural call echoed through the trees. The mother bear was searching for her baby, and she was getting closer. Jake could hear branches snapping and leaves rustling as the massive animal moved through the underbrush. His hands began to shake as he realized the impossible situation he was facing. Every instinct screamed at Jake to run. He knew the statistics better than anyone. Mother bears protecting their cubs were responsible for most fatal bear attacks on humans. They could run 30 miles per hour and had the strength to break a man's neck with a single swipe of their paws. The mother's calls were becoming more frantic and frequent, which meant she was tracking her cub's scent and would find the spot within minutes. Jake pulled out his radio to call for backup, but realized help would never arrive in time. The nearest ranger station was 40 minutes away by truck, and the cub would be dead long before anyone could reach them. He looked at the small animal again and saw its eyes beginning to glaze over. The wire snare was cutting off circulation to its leg, and shock was setting in. The mother bear's voice boomed to the forest again, much closer this time. Jake estimated she was maybe 200 yards away and closing fast. His mind raced through his options. He could climb a tree and wait for her to find her cub, but bears were excellent climbers. He could try to outrun her, but that was impossible in thick forest terrain. Or he could do something that went against every piece of training he had ever received. Jake reached for the folding knife on his belt, his hands trembling as he opened the blade. He had maybe 3 minutes before the mother bear arrived. 3 minutes to cut through the wire, free the cub, and somehow get out of there alive. The smart choice was to leave immediately and let nature take its course. But as he looked into the cub's frightened eyes, Jake knew he could not walk away from a creature that was suffering because of human cruelty. Taking a deep breath, Jake stepped out from behind the tree and moved toward the trapped cub, knowing he might be making the last decision of his life. Jake's knife sliced through the first strand of wire, but the metal was thicker than he expected. The cub flinched and cried out as Jake worked frantically to cut through the remaining strands. Blood covered his hands as he tried to keep the wire steady while sawing through it with his blade. The little bear was too weak to struggle much, which terrified Jake even more than if it had been fighting. The mother bear's calls were deafening now, echoing off the trees from what sounded like just 50 yards away. Jake could hear her massive body crashing through the underbrush, breaking branches and moving with frightening speed. His heart hammered against his ribs as sweat dripped into his eyes despite the cool morning air. Every second felt like an eternity as he worked to free the trapped animal. Finally, the last strand of wire snapped. The cub's leg was badly damaged, with deep cuts that would need immediate attention. Jake quickly pulled off his flannel shirt and wrapped it around the wounded leg to stop the bleeding. The cub was so exhausted it barely reacted to his touch, which was both a blessing and a curse. At least it would not bite him, but its lack of response meant it was close to death from blood loss and shock. Jake scooped the small bear into his arms, surprised by how light it felt. The cub could not have weighed more than 15 pounds, and its breathing was shallow and rapid as he held the injured animal against his chest. Jake realized he had made a terrible mistake. His clothes and skin were now covered with the cub's scent. Any mother bear would smell her baby on him from 100 yards away. The thunderous roar that split the morning air made Jake's knees buckle. The mother bear had found their location and was very close. But something in that roar made Jake's blood freeze. It was not just one voice calling out. There were multiple bears responding to the mother's call, their deep voices creating a terrifying chorus that seemed to come from all directions. Jake spun around, still clutching the injured cub, and realized he was hearing something that should have been impossible. Bears were typically solitary animals, except during mating season, or when mothers were with their young cubs. But the sound surrounding him suggested an entire group of adult bears was converging on his position. The forest seemed to vibrate with their calls as they communicated with each other. Panic set in as Jake understood the situation had gone from dangerous to hopeless. He could handle encountering one angry mother bear if he was lucky and smart. But multiple bears working together was something he had never trained for because it almost never happened. He started running toward what he hoped was the nearest trail, the wounded cub bouncing in his arms. The little bear began making soft mewing sounds, almost like a house cat. Jake realized the cub was calling out to its family, letting them know exactly where he was. Every sound the baby made was like a beacon guiding the adult bears straight to him. He could not put the cub down because it would die from its injuries, but carrying it meant he was essentially carrying his own death sentence. Heavy footsteps thundered to the forest behind him, and Jake knew the bears were closing in fast. He had maybe 30 seconds before they caught up to him. There was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide with an injured animal in his arms. Jake stumbled into a small clearing and knew immediately that he had run out of options. The open space was surrounded by thick trees and dense undergrowth with no visible escape routes. His legs felt like rubber as he clutched the injured cub to his chest, both of them breathing heavily. The little bear had stopped making sounds, which Jake hoped meant it was conserving its energy rather than slipping away. The forest around him went completely silent. No bird singing, no insects buzzing, no wind rustling through the leaves. It was a kind of silence that made Jake's skin crawl because he knew what it meant. Predators were nearby, and every other living creature had gone into hiding. He stood in the center of the clearing, turning slowly in a circle as he scanned the tree line for movement. A massive black shape emerged from behind a large pine tree to his left. The mother bear was even bigger than Jake had imagined, easily 400 pounds of muscle and protective fury. Her small dark eyes were locked onto him with an intensity that made his knees shake. She moved with surprising grace for such a large animal, her powerful shoulders rolling with each step as she entered the clearing. Before Jake could even process what he was seeing, another bear appeared from his right. This one was a huge male, probably close to 500 pounds, with a thick brown coat and scars across his muzzle that spoke of many battles. The male bear's presence made no sense to Jake, because adult males typically avoided females with cubs. Yet here he was, moving in coordination with a mother as if they were hunting together. Two more adult bears emerged from the forest behind Jake, cutting off his retreat. These were younger but still dangerous, their movements quick and alert as they took their positions. Jake realized with growing terror that he was witnessing something that wildlife experts claimed was nearly impossible. Bears were forming a coordinated group to deal with a perceived threat. The sixth bear that stepped into the clearing made Jake's heart nearly stop. It was another massive female, possibly the mother bear's sister or older daughter. She was just as large and intimidating as the first mother, and her aggressive posture left no doubt about her intentions. The bears had not just found Jake by accident. They had surrounded him with military precision. Jake found himself in the exact center of the clearing with 6 enormous bears forming a loose circle around him. Each bear was positioned about 20 feet away, close enough to reach him in 2 quick bounds, but far enough to avoid getting in each other's way. They began moving slowly clockwise around him, their eyes never leaving his face. The injured cub in Jake's arms seemed to sense its family nearby and began making weak, chirping sounds. The mother bear's ears perked up at her baby's voice, and she took 2 steps closer to Jake. Her lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth that could crush bones without effort. The other bears responded to her movement by tightening their circle, reducing the distance between them and Jake to about 15 feet. Jake's training told him to avoid eye contact, make himself appear small, and back away slowly. But there was nowhere to back away to, and looking down at the ground seemed like a good way to miss the attack that would kill him. His mouth was completely dry, and his hands were shaking so badly he was afraid he might drop the injured cub. The massive male bear lifted his nose and sniffed the air loudly, testing Jake's scent. The sound was like a freight train in the deadly quiet clearing. One by one, The other bears began doing the same thing, their large black noses working to gather information about this human, who smelled like their injured family member. Jake realized that what happened in the next few seconds would determine whether he lived or died. The mother bear took another step forward, and Jake prepared himself for the attack that would end his life. He closed his eyes and held the injured cub closer to his chest, hoping his death would at least be quick. But instead of the crushing blow he expected, he felt something warm and wet touch his free hand. Jake opened his eyes in shock to see the massive mother bear's nose gently pressed against his knuckles. She was not biting or clawing at him. She was sniffing his hand with the same careful attention a dog might give to a new person. Her dark eyes looked up at him, and Jake saw something there that made his heart skip a beat. There was no rage or aggression in her gaze. Instead, he saw what looked almost like gratitude. The mother bear stepped back and made a soft, chuffing sound, almost like a gentle bark. To Jake's amazement, she then did something that defied everything he knew about wild animal behavior. She sat down on her haunches like a giant dog and tilted her head toward the injured cub in his arms. Her body language was completely relaxed, showing none of the tension or threat posture that bears displayed before attacking. The other bears around the clearing began to relax as well, taking their cues from the mother. The enormous male lowered himself to the ground and rested his massive head on his paws, watching Jake with curious eyes rather than hostile ones. The younger bears stopped their slow circling and settled into comfortable positions, as if they were planning to stay and observe rather than attack. Jake's mind struggled to process what was happening. Every piece of training and experience told him that this situation was impossible. Wild bears did not behave this way around humans, especially when one of their cubs was involved. Yet here he was, standing in the middle of 6 massive predators who seemed to understand that he was trying to help rather than harm their injured family member. The mother bear made another soft sound and gestured with her nose toward Jake's arms where the cub lay wrapped in his shirt. Jake realized with growing amazement that she was asking him to help her baby. Somehow, this wild animal had recognized that he was trying to save her cub's life, and she was giving him permission to continue. With trembling hands, Jake slowly knelt down and placed the injured cub on the soft grass. The little bear was still breathing, but very weak from blood loss. Jake unwrapped his shirt and examined the wounds on the cub's leg. The wire snare had cut deep, but the bleeding had mostly stopped thanks to the pressure bandage he had applied. The mother bear moved closer and lay down next to Jake, her massive body just 3 feet away from where he knelt. She watched intently as he cleaned the wounds with water from his canteen and applied antiseptic from his first aid kit. Never once did she show any sign of aggression or impatience, even though Jake was handling her most precious possession. What happened next made Jake question everything he thought he knew about the natural world. The huge male bear rose to his feet and walked away from the clearing, returning a few minutes later with a mouthful of fresh moss. He dropped the moss next to Jake and nudged it toward him with his enormous snout. Jake realized the bear was offering him clean material to help bandage the cub's wounds. The other bears began bringing him things as well. One female brought him clear water, cupped in a large leaf. Another brought him smooth stones that could be used to weigh down the bandages. Jake found himself working alongside a family of wild bears who were actively helping him save their injured relative. As Jake finished treating the cub's wounds, the little animal opened its eyes and looked up at him. For a moment, human and bear cub stared at each other in perfect understanding. The cub made a soft sound that Jake somehow knew was a thank you, then turned toward his mother and made the same sound. The mother bear looked at Jake with those intelligent dark eyes and did something that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. She reached out with one massive paw and gently touched his face. The touch of Mother Bear's paw against Jake's cheek was surprisingly gentle, her rough pads warm against the skin. In that moment, Jake felt a connection to the natural world that he had never experienced before. This wild animal, who should have seen him as a deadly threat, would show him affection and trust that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than instinct. Jake slowly stood up, his legs still shaking from the incredible encounter. The injured cub was now alert and trying to stand on its bandaged leg. The little bear was still weak, but the immediate danger had passed. Jake knew that with proper rest and his mother's care, the cub would recover fully from its ordeal. The mother bear gently picked up her baby in her mouth. the way cats carry their kittens. The cub did not struggle or cry out, trusting completely in its mother's grip. Jake watched as she carried the little one to the edge of the clearing, where the soft grass met the forest floor. She set the cub down carefully and began grooming its fur with her massive tongue. One by one, the other bears began to rise and move toward the forest. The huge male was the first to leave, disappearing into the thick trees without a sound despite his enormous size. The younger bears followed, melting into the underbrush like shadows. Jake realized that his incredible encounter was coming to an end, and he felt a strange sadness wash over him. The second female bear, who Jake now suspected was a mother-sister, approached him before leaving. She sniffed his hands and arms thoroughly, as if memorizing his scent. Then she did something that made Jake's eyes fill with tears. She pressed her forehead against his chest for just a moment, a gesture that felt like a blessing from the wilderness itself. Jake thought the amazing experience was over when the mother bear finished caring for her cub and began to walk away. But as she reached the tree line, she stopped and looked back at him. For several long seconds, they stared at each other across the clearing. Then the mother bear did something that Jake knew he would never see again in his lifetime. She walked back to him, leaving her cub safe at the edge of the forest. Her approach was slow and deliberate, and Jake could see intelligence shining in her dark eyes. She stopped directly in front of him, so close that he could feel her warm breath on his face. Then she reared up on her hind legs, towering over him at nearly 8 feet tall. Jake's heart hammered as the massive bear loomed above him, but he felt no fear. Instead, he felt honored to be in the presence of such a magnificent creature. The mother bear reached out with both front paws and gently placed them on Jake's shoulders, as if she were embracing him. For a moment that lasted an eternity, human and bear stood together in perfect harmony. When she lowered herself back to all fours, the other bears had returned to the clearing. All 6 of them formed a circle around Jake one final time, but this time there was no threat or danger in their formation. They were honoring him, showing him a respect that no human had ever earned from wild animals before. The bears began to make soft sounds, gentle rumbles and chuffs that seemed to fill the air with music. Jake realized they were saying goodbye to him in their own language, thanking him for saving one of their own. The sound wrapped around him like a warm blanket, and he felt tears streaming down his face. One by one, the bears touched their noses to his hands before disappearing into the forest. The mother bear was the last to leave, carrying her injured cub gently in her mouth. She paused at the edge of the clearing and looked back at Jake one final time, her eyes holding a message that needed no words. Then they were gone, leaving Jake alone in the clearing with only the memory of the most incredible experience of his life. He stood there for a long time, hardly believing what had just happened. He had not only survived an encounter with 6 wild bears, but had been accepted by them as family. The natural world had revealed one of its deepest secrets to him, and he knew that his life would never be the same. Jake's incredible encounter with the bear family changed everything he thought he knew about the wild. That one moment of courage to save an injured cub led to the most unbelievable experience any human could imagine. If stories like this one leave you amazed and wanting more incredible true tales from the natural world, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, so you never miss another unbelievable story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about wildlife. These remarkable encounters happen more often than you might think, and we bring you the most astonishing ones right here.